Conflict between Russia and Ukraine continues to escalate. I'm Marco Perry. Welcome to the Perry Platform. Tensions between Russia and Ukraine are boiling, and the world is wondering why. How did we get here? And what motivations are behind the scenes pulling the strings? Before we get too deep into that, though, I think geography is important, so let's review that. Russia truly is a massive country, and Ukraine borders it on the west. Ukraine is actually fairly close to Moscow. Now, Russia, it's situated all the way east of the core European countries, so making a play towards Ukraine, which is in fact west, provides many strategic benefits. You get improved access to the EU, and perhaps less roadblocks to clear if some type of conflict were to erupt one day across the continent. Presumably, the main forces you'd be combating with are the likes of the UK, France, maybe Italy, and those are all to the west, and you do have Ukraine blocking your path. So, to clear that in advance, there is some strategic benefit to it. Not to mention that more land is pretty much always good. As a country like Russia, for you to move in and expand, you get to exploit all of the resources of the location that you begin to occupy. Ukraine exports a fair bit of metal, fuel, machinery, and food. All great things to have. It's not like it's a destitute wasteland with nothing to offer. Land like that, with assets on it, is going to be desirable to pretty much anyone. And sometimes there are people who are willing to resort to illicit means to get a piece of it. Now, fast forward to today, and we have reports of major military buildups on the Ukrainian border. Russian troops are stationed and ready to go. Russia has said, we're simply doing this as a military exercise, but there are many holes in that excuse. Namely, why couldn't you do your exercise a bit further away from the border? Why do you have to present such a menacing threat to Ukraine simply due to an exercise? Or, why do you need troops to remain there for so long? Sure, you do your exercise, you see how fast you can mobilize, but why have you been there for months now? Or, why haven't you pulled them back when things got heated? When Ukraine told you, we feel threatened? When the rest of the world was saying, hey, what are you doing there? Why didn't you just pull out? It doesn't make any sense, and if you buy that excuse from Russia, well, you may be in for a rude wake-up call. Of course, it is true that we don't know the exact reasons precisely, but beyond reasonable doubt, it's safe to assume that some type of intimidation or preparation for a larger move, something like an invasion, is being played with. That notion is being explored by Russia. Now, CBC speculates that, there are a couple other things that may have triggered this move. Was it Biden calling Putin the killer? Maybe that made Putin feel threatened, and thus he had the feeling that he needed to expand and deploy his military and get more land. Or was it the Ukrainian president sanctioning a Putin ally for supposedly financing terrorism, and this here is a show of might, to discourage such future behavior, to show Ukraine that, hey, if you take actions against my allies, we're going to scare you. And further, if you don't buy that threat, we'll move in. We can do it easily. Our troops are on your border right now. And that is something to worry about as the Ukrainian president. One thing that should be understood here as well is that it's not a fair battle. If Ukraine and Russia were to engage in combat, it wouldn't be a 50-50 shot. All the odds would be in Russia's favor. Russia has about 144 million people to Ukraine's 44 million. Russia's GDP is 1.7 trillion, while Ukraine is about 153 billion. So, you have that major difference in manpower, major difference in capital, and that's not even to mention military prowess. Russia is far more advanced in that regard. It certainly would not be what you would consider a fair fight. Ukraine would be at a major disadvantage, and any upset there would be surprising. That's why, to many Western nations, this was something that was troubling, and as a result, they began to speak up to try and deter Russia. And behind the words, behind just speaking up, there is a threat of military intervention. Now, this military buildup, it started around mid-March. Well, actually, that's when the first reports came out, but there were plans, presumably, to get this rolling before then. And we've seen tens of thousands of troops and trainloads of tanks, trucks, and even ballistic missiles within striking distance of Ukraine's border. And that's why I do say it's worrisome. What kind of military exercise is this? take it the other way around. What if Ukraine one day was like, hey, I want to do a military exercise. Let me move all my missiles, all my soldiers, all my tanks to the Russian border. What would Russia do? Would they say, hey, let's assume that they're just exercising? No. No logical party would go there, especially when you don't pull out when people are asking you to. It's definitely a threat. Now, keep in mind, there is another factor here that's adding to the tension. It's not like we haven't seen this behavior before from Russia. In 2014, Russia annexed the Crimean Peninsula. They now operate as a Russian federal subject. In other words, Russia took control of this region and spread their influence. Could that happen in Ukraine? Or at least a part of it? When Russia talks about this type of military exercise, we already know there is some type of notion of expansion. Expansion doesn't mean that Russia is going to eat all of Ukraine. It could simply be a portion of it, and that'd be good enough, especially when the political environment is complicated. There are actually groups within the Ukraine government and the country who support being absorbed by Russia. There is a separatist movement there. So there are complications along the way, but you have Russia in a position where they could be seeking to exploit that, where they could be seeking to create further federal subjects in the region. As the Ukrainian government, you obviously don't want to see that because you lose out on all these resources, and further, it truly is your land. And as a global citizen or another country like America or Canada, you don't want to see it because Russia has proved itself to be a geopolitical threat over and over again, and them getting stronger, them getting bigger, is not something you want to see. So, what's happened now? Ukraine has responded by seeking stronger relations with the European Union and other NATO countries. Even further, they want to join NATO. Now, why is that important? For those who are unaware, NATO is an alliance agreement between European and North American countries. Members include America, Canada, the UK, France, and many more. All in all, there are 30 members, a part of NATO, and you don't want to fight any of them, because the treaty will bring its full wrath down upon you if you go looking for a fight. One of the many written agreements in the treaty is that if a NATO ally is a victim of an armed attack, each and every member of the alliance will consider this an act of violence as an armed attack against all its members, and they will take action it deems necessary to assist the ally attacked. So, to put it simply, if you attack Canada, for example, the other members of NATO have to treat it as an attack to themselves. So, you can see why a country like Russia would think twice before attacking Ukraine. Do you really want to do that when they have an alliance, if they were part of NATO, which calls into reality America, the UK, France, and Canada, treating it as an attack on them? So we talked about it before. Ukraine alone, they couldn't really match up with Russia. But if you bring in America and Canada and the UK and France and Italy and Spain and all these other countries, Russia will get crushed. This is too much of a force, especially even America alone. That's too much of a force to battle, one-on-one. So, being a member of NATO is very powerful. It's something that many countries want. And as Canada, we're lucky to be a member of it. Why is that? Well, as we just talked about, having the likes of America contractually obligated to defend you if attacked is a major defense mechanism within itself. Just the idea that facing the American military is going to deter many countries from messing with you. I will make one side note here very quickly, and it's another contractual obligation of all the members of NATO. They agree that their aim is to reach or maintain the target defense spending of at least 2% of their GDP by 2024. So in layman's terms, to be a member of NATO, you have to put at least 2% of your GDP towards your military. This is to ensure that all the members of NATO can pull their weight if a conflict did arise. If you put 0% of your GDP towards the military, and you say, hey, I don't have to bother with that, I'm a NATO member. If you attack me, well, Big Brother America is going to handle it. Big Brother America might not like that, because you're essentially a leech now, and you provide no benefit. America, and the UK, and France, they all expect you to pull your weight. If a conflict did arise, you'll be there ready to help out. You won't simply be kept on the sidelines because you have a lackluster military. This ties into something very funny that the NDP were talking about, and I did an episode on it. It's shining a light on the idiocy of the federal NDP's rejected party proposal of disbanding the Canadian military, of abolishing it. Warlike situations are not figments of your imagination in 2021. They are very real. Losing our NATO membership because we didn't want to pay up and keep a crucial service like the military would be a major blow. That stems from foolishness and far left thinking. Being a member of NATO and having a functioning military are assets that other countries would literally kill for, and here we are now recognizing the blessing that it is. It really is a sign of privilege that comes from these thinking circles. Now, reports indicate that in the meantime, Russian state TV has been saturated with anti-Ukrainian rhetoric and propaganda, possibly to prepare the Russian public for some sort of military operation. And if you were convinced that Russia truly was just doing a military exercise, this should be the nail in the coffin for that thinking. There's only one reason why you would unleash the waves of propaganda among your population: to prepare them for a military operation. If you were simply doing an exercise, there is no reason why you would begin to saturate your local news with anti-Ukrainian rhetoric. It's just a waste of effort. But if you secretly wanted to prepare your population for the possibility of an invasion, then sure, it makes sense to do it. Now, why is that? Well, it's not like the citizens are just puppets. There has to be some conditioning done, otherwise they may ask questions. They may go to Putin and cause a problem. They might say, hey, why are we actually attacking Ukraine? Why are we being the aggressor and trying to expand into their territory? We don't want that. We might have family in the military. We don't want to see them die. We could have friends in there. We don't want to see them die. It's a waste of money. We'd rather you focus on internal issues, because Lord knows there's many in Russia. And all of these points will come up. But Russia being strategic, because they actually are very strategic, they're a very thoughtful entity. To underestimate them is a big mistake. What they're doing is conditioning the people to preemptively get rid of those concerns, probably in the propaganda. I haven't seen it. They're labeling Ukraine as the aggressor. They're painting a scary image. They're saying, hey, Ukraine could come in and invade us. Do you want to be caught off guard? Do you want to be slaughtered? Or do you want to take the proactive approach and go in there first? Maybe the propaganda is demonizing the population, making the people afraid of them, making the people more likely to support a military operation. That is the essence of propaganda. In a nutshell, it's a lie, a deception, or a misleading message meant to align you with the propaganda producer's agenda. Now, of course, in Russia, it's very overt. They have propaganda channels. It's hard to trust anything they say. But even in places like America and Canada, certain politicians are a fan of this. They will rile you up by saying something, a slogan, whatever it is, to get you feeling a certain way emotionally. Now, whether or not it's true, who cares about that? They're trying to produce an effect. The only good politician is one who abides by the truth first, and their agenda is secondary. Bad politicians do the opposite. Their agenda is primary, and if they have to bend the truth, if they have to crack a few eggs to make an omelet, they'll be happy to do that. At least with the notion of truth, there is some objectivity to it. There is a realm of shared logic and reasoning that we can all reach, but when you're dealing with these subjective agenda elements that a politician is likely to cling to, they'll be able to manipulate reality in whatever ways they see fit. And if that takes advantage of you, if that keeps you in the dark, well, they're not going to be concerned about that. That goes to a far extreme in places like Russia, North Korea, and China. Even Iran, there's many countries who partake in that. You may even be surprised to find inklings of propaganda within your own country, and the only way to protect against that is to engage in critical thinking and discussion, to partake in free speech and to have debates and to talk to people who you don't agree with, to broaden your horizons, to really do research, and to become familiar with things like logical fallacies, so you don't find yourself caught up in one of them as part of the propaganda snare. Now, today reports are indicating that Russia has cooled off a little bit. They still have thousands of troops at the border, but due to the fact that America and Europe and many other nations are taking a close, measured approach to combating the aggression, Russia is starting to see the writing on the wall. They don't really want that kind of conflict right now, especially with the whole world. There's a massive spotlight on them. Strategically, and Russia being very strategic, they wouldn't be foolish enough to continue and go forward trying to invade Ukraine when the whole world will be likely to condemn it and further lander themselves and cause a war that could be the beginning of a World War III, really. Russia would lose that. Well, that's considering the possibility that they don't ally themselves with China. Now, Russia plus China, who have been somewhat more friendly lately, that would be a force to reckon with. You would have America and Europe and Canada essentially fighting against Russia and China, and whoever else would join that conflict, maybe even Iran would hop in, some Middle Eastern countries. It could be quite the problem, actually. That would likely result in the mutually assured destruction of everyone. So, something to avoid. Russia, I feel, this is just speculation now, but it makes sense for them to pull back a little bit, to die down and move away, to kill the pressure, to get rid of the threat for now. But Russia has done their experiment. They've seen what happens when it becomes very public what's going on. They were able to move the military and the missiles to the border. They know how fast it can be. They know how quickly they can get it done. And they understand how it has to happen. In a sense, they become more efficient in that regard, doing a trial run. I firmly believe Russia will pull back for now and they'll wait. They'll seek an opportunity when another major event has happened that will provide them a smokescreen where they can begin to make a move, and they'll do it fast. They'll do it quick, and they'll accomplish whatever their objective is. So right now, you do have major things like COVID going on, but it has become somewhat dull. People are used to it. When a news story comes up that Russia is trying to invade Ukraine, everyone's paying attention, but what if something bigger popped up? Something that encapsulated the mind of the people, like another conflict, maybe between China and the Philippines because that's brewing too. Something like that could provide an adequate smokescreen to allow for Russia to take care of what it has to do. And the only party who would be talking about it would be Ukraine, but if the rest of the world is embroiled in another conflict or another news story, it might not reach the same ears as it did this first time. So, it's a dangerous situation. I do think possibly adding Ukraine to NATO, after vetting and making sure they agree to the terms, could be a good solution here. To deter Russia forever, indefinitely. Because right now, if Russia were to go into Ukraine, there is no obligation for the rest of the world to do anything, especially if there are other things going on that command their attention. But if Ukraine were to be allowed into NATO, attacking Ukraine would be like attacking the other countries and Russia would get stomped out. So something to explore there. Now, I mentioned China briefly, and I do want to expand more on that. They're actually in the position that Russia would like to be in themselves. China is following suit. They're doing something very similar to Russia. They're scouting out, trying to see where they can expand their territory. There's been issues between China and the Philippines, China and Taiwan, and it has caught attention, but I would argue not as much as Russia and Ukraine. And that's a smokescreen, the one we just talked about. All the eyes are focused on Russia and Ukraine because it seems possible that a very direct conflict could come out of it. While China has been moving a little bit stealthily in the shadows, they've been moving their warships to the Philippine waterways. They've been talking about absorbing Taiwan, and they've made moves towards it. They've actually moved their military and done things very similar to Russia. But given the fact that there's all this chaos going on, they haven't caught as much flack. And this is something to do with sensory overload. There's only so much issues you can pay attention to. And China is capitalizing on that. Now, on the Philippines front, America did send in their fleet, and the Philippine force combined with that, and China was forced to retreat because they did see that, oh, these guys are actually serious about defending this territory. China was kind of poking the bear, seeing what would happen if they moved into that waterway. And Taiwan has said they're willing to fight to the death, basically, to maintain their independence. So these tests are going on. China's trying to see what kind of response they would incur, and now they know. They know the Philippines will be protected by America. They know Taiwan means business. Well, maybe they'll alter their agenda. Maybe they won't care and they'll still carry on. Who knows, but they're learning and they're trying to expand. Russia, the same thing. They're learning and trying to expand. It's very easy to joke about the possibility of a World War III, but we're actually very deep down that timeline. You have China basically committing a genocide with the Uyghur Muslim population there. China looking to expand its borders by poking at the Philippines, by poking at Taiwan. And you have Russia pretty much doing the same thing, trying to expand its borders. If there was a recipe for a world war, that's kind of it. A genocide combined with military expansion, combined with aspirations of making your country bigger, that's not looking good. And something to keep a very close eye on. To the people who think that we don't need an army, that war is a figment of the past, look around. Become aware of the global landscape and readjust your aim. Things could get very scary very fast. And it seems like we're kind of heading that way. China and Russia are doing some crazy stuff there. And don't underestimate their power. Maybe individually they can be handled, but a unity of Russia and China, that can do a lot of damage. Think about what happened in World War II between fundamentally a unity of Germany and Russia. If you sub out Germany for China, which is a far stronger entity, an entity with nuclear weaponry and a massive economy and lots of people, that's a dangerous duo. And I do fear what would happen if that comes to fruition. So, taking measures now to curb that is something the entire world has to do. World leaders need to talk more about this and figure out how to approach the changing situation. Because we do see some bad actors making moves now. If you remain dormant and you do nothing, they're going to keep poking and prodding, and before you know it, you'll be in a conflict. So, to think about how to handle that is something that has to be at the top of everyone's priority list. Now, we will see how things play out, but there is some very dangerous potential brewing here. I'll keep you up to date as always, and with that, it brings us now to the end of our conversation for today. If you enjoyed the content, be sure to leave a review and share. That'll help us grow. And you can find me online at perryplatform.org and on social media at perryplatform. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you soon.